Wasn't working. So welcome on board. How scientific performance-based coaching can elevate the way you think, act, and lead. That's exactly what we're going to talk about today. Let's start by having a look at the agenda. What's the program for today? I'm going to quickly introduce myself so you will understand what is my approach. And also we will talk about what coaching is, how it can boost your performance, presence, and sense of aliveness at work and in your private life, and an overview on how your brain works and how it matters. What you will be able to do after this webinar is to understand what the brain-based approach is and if it suits you, and evaluate if and when it can be beneficial for you the most, and then we will have a final part with some questions answered. So feel free to drop any question in the chat, so Rob will handle this at the end, and we will try to answer to as many as possible. Now, let's start by one of the most quoted men ever. Albert Einstein said that we cannot solve our problems from the same level of consciousness that created them. What that means is, if you find yourself stuck in a certain situation, it's probably due to your way of thinking about that problem. Unless you change the way you think about that, nothing is going to really change. Now, what we do in coaching is exactly this. We help you think differently so you can expand your perspective and therefore take different actions so you can get unstuck, make some change habit, change behaviors, resolve conflicts, and so on. Now, my personal definition of coaching is that coaching is a solution-focused, results-oriented partnership that expands coaches' thinking, acting, and leading capabilities by updating their mindset and their mental models. The way we do this is explained in this webinar, so you will understand exactly what it means working with a coach and in what way, through what approach, methodologies, and techniques we actually help you do this. Let's have a quick look about who am I and what entitles me to be here today. I am Bruna De Palo. I am Italian and London-based, and I work online everywhere. My clients are really spread around the world. I am a brain-based certified leadership and career coach, which means I have a specific approach, which I'll explain throughout the webinar, which helps you understand how your brain works and apply this knowledge into your daily life, being it at work, a private life, with your team members, with your family members, children, and so on. What I noticed by working for years with clients with this approach is that when they understand the mechanism behind their behaviors, they own the change process. By understanding why you do what you do, you're much more able to own it and apply some tips and techniques to regulate yourself, for example, rather than if you're just reading a book and getting some tips here and there. So my job is explain how your brain works, make the most of these dynamics in our coaching engagement, and ensure that you will understand yourself much better so you won't depend from someone else in making changes, but you will always know what to do at the right time. In fact, my approach is a blended approach, I would say, between coaching and mentoring. As we will see what coaching is, this fits with a mentoring approach where I'm going to share my frameworks and perspectives, normally research-based perspective and frameworks that help you see things from a different perspective, think differently, and therefore act in a different way. My background is in IT, so I'm quite used to work with engineers. I've spent nearly 20 years in web development, and I think I have an understanding of how engineers see the world. My typical clients normally are coming from banking, finance, tech, construction, and sometimes even retail. If you want more information, that's my website, my LinkedIn profile, and that's really all about me, unless you have any specific question about the approach, and I'm going to answer at the end of the session. Let's dig into what coaching is instead, which is much more interesting. Now, you might be familiar with horizontal development. Horizontal development is what you gain when you engage in a training course. When you learn, when you focus on learning new skills, knowledge, and competencies, that is known as horizontal development, which you can imagine like you walking ahead and earning new territory. That is quite known. What is less known instead is what we do through coaching, that instead is vertical development. What that means is that it's an elevation of your level of consciousness that expands thinking, acting, and leading capabilities. So you have to see these like growing from within, where you elevate, physically elevate, imagine you're elevating yourself so you reach a higher position, and from that position, the more that you learn in terms of horizontal development will be on a much grander scale. This is very well explained in a white paper written by Nicholas Petrie from the Center for Creative Leadership, which explains the concept of horizontal and vertical development through the metaphor of a glass. Let's have a look. What horizontal development means in these terms is like if you are like a glass and you keep adding water, there's only a certain extent of water that you can add to that dimension of the glass. What we do through coaching, and particularly in vertical development, is the expansion of the glass so that it can contain more water. It is also another metaphor that Nicholas Petrie uses, is very powerful. It's like you have to see your vertical development as an upgrade of your internal operating system. And horizontal development is like the installation of new apps. So if you want to install new apps, you have at one point to upgrade your internal operating system. Sorry for the police, that's perks of living next to the Pope in Rome. I hope you can't hear it. So you can imagine that the developmental stage that we all go through as children is quite mandatory. So children go through different developmental stages because it's part of their nature. They're naturally driven internally in doing this. And it is mandatory because that's what makes them fulfilled human beings. It's part of their mission. Now, what science discovered is that even adults go through different developmental stages, but they do it subconsciously. And it's not mandatory. In fact, many people don't. People who engage with personal and professional developmental journey, they go through these further developmental stages. But you have to make a conscious decision to do this. What's the benefit of this is that, of course, you will live a more fulfilling life because you will be more present and you will go for bolder actions and opportunities. It takes a conscious effort, and that's why coaching becomes so effective, because it has a tangible effect on career and life. Now, all this is possible because there is a very important concept that we need to understand about our brain, and that is the brain is defined as neuroplastic. What that means to you is that the brain can change. The brain can change means that through the use of the mind, through the use of thoughts, you can change the shape of your brain. And it's the change of the shape of your brain that can determine the change in behavior. This book that I'm presenting here in the slide from Norman Deutsch is a brilliant book that I highly recommend you to read if you're interested in this topic. This is research-based stuff and is full of real stories that are incredibly fascinating and can really explain how this happens. So the fact that the brain can change its shape and therefore the way you think is determined by how you use your mind. This is what we do in coaching. By forcing you to think differently about a certain situation, we enable a change in the structure. This is also what, to a certain extent, psychotherapy does as well. You're probably more familiar with the benefit of psychotherapy than coaching. Psychotherapy works very much with the past. And while we can't change the past, we can definitely change our perception of what happened in the past. And by doing this, you open up new perspective to analyze what happened and avoid that this will impact your present and your future. That's the concept of psychotherapy, strictly speaking. Coaching, instead of focusing on the past, focus very much on the present and the future. By doing this, we move from being problem-focused I mean, the problem is something that we all know. And the brain is naturally inclined to think about the problem and the details of the problem because they're more tangible. They are known. What that means is that unless you have someone helping you to shift from problem focus to solution focus, you will always tend to be stuck, as Einstein said. The fact that the brain is neuroplastic, it means that there is the possibility that by working through your mind, either through psychotherapy or coaching, you can change the shape and you can expand your view of the present and the future. Just to give you an idea of what it means that the brain is neuroplastic, you probably know when people have a stroke, sometimes they lose the use of part of the body, let's say the limbs, very often. Why? Because the stroke burns the maps in the brain that are connected with our limbs. So by burning that map, the brain is not able to control that part of the body anymore. And that is what's been proved for decades. Now, in this book, the most fascinating story I found here is about a man who didn't want to give up after a stroke. He was told by doctors that he couldn't walk anymore, but he didn't give up. And he found his own way, and this is really incredible. It still makes me shiver. He found his own way to rebuild that map in his brain through mental exercises. And by doing this, that map got alive again, and he started walking again. And that was against every forecast that the doctors could make at that time. So all these stories will help you understand that change is possible, and also how change actually happens. It's strictly related to how your brain works. It's not just a matter of behavior. Your behavior is determined by how your brain works. That's why my approach helps you understand and own all this. So the brain can change. Let's see how it actually happens and how coaching works. Strictly speaking, the job of a coach is to trigger insights in your brain and enable outside-of-the-box solutions. That's what we do. Okay. What is an insight? The insight is the connection between two dormant, let's say seemingly unrelated maps in your brain, two different thoughts in your brain, that suddenly, for some reason, as a response to an external stimulus, get connected. In that moment, you have an insight and you experience a little rush of dopamine. Think about the last time you had an insight or intuition, if you like. How did you feel in that moment? Do you remember that quick elation you had in the moment? Think, for example, about the last time you watched a movie with a complex plot, and then suddenly, because of a detail or because of a sentence, you immediately made sense of everything that was happening. How did you feel in that moment? That signals you just had an insight. So understanding what is an insight is key, because the insight is the source of creative thinking. So if we go back to where we started, why am I stuck and how can I think differently? You want to engage with your creative thinking, which is an ability that every brain has. Some people, of course, have developed this more, some people less, but it's something that we can all engage with, assuming that we understand how it all works. Let's go a little bit more in detail. This is your brain, or sort of. What you see here is a representation of a few of the hundreds of thousands of thoughts that you have every day. Your internal thoughts or stimulus or thoughts in response to external stimuli, we're bombarded by thoughts. If our brain wasn't an energy efficient machine, we would be exhausted every day by noon. What that means is that the brain, which is the part of our body that consumes most energy, it consumes 25% of the energy of the whole body. If the brain doesn't take care of how it uses its energy, we would be seriously in trouble. So we can't pay attention to all the thoughts that cross our mind every day. Therefore, if we want to retain some information, we really have to engage with those thoughts. Otherwise, it will be all flat and they will all have the same meaning for us. But if we spend some time to reflect on something, we have an opportunity to keep that thought alive. This is exactly what happens in coaching. If I give you a tip, let's say that I'm a consultant and you come to me because you want to change, I don't know, for example, you want to change the way you make decisions, you want to improve your decision-making process. I can give you a tip, okay? If I do this, what I'm telling you is one of those millions of thoughts that you have in your brain. Chances are it won't stick. How do I know this? Well, if it wasn't for this, with all the self-help books and personal and professional development courses and tips and blogs that we have on the internet, we would be in the ideal world. If all these things, if only sharing thoughts could really solve the problem, we would be, really in the ideal world. The reason why this doesn't happen is because it doesn't stick. Conversely, an insight tends to stick. Why? Because the moment you make that connection between two thoughts and you have an insight, that thought is already naturally born, much more empowered. It comes with a different strength. That's why in that moment you have a rush of dopamine and you feel that spark when you have an insight. Now, the thing is, when you have an insight, because it's your own idea, it tends to stick in your brain way more than if I give you a tip. So if you come to me because you want to change, improve your decision-making process, instead of giving a tip, I have much more chances to help you make a change. I ask you questions. I understand this might seem counterintuitive, but by asking questions, by creating the natural positive environment where insight will arise, which we will see in a moment, by asking the right question at the right time, I can elicit that energy and that thought, and you will own it. Why? Because the idea was born in your brain, and you will probably stick to it much more than if you read a paragraph on a book or you just listened to my thoughts. This also explains why we like our ideas way more than anyone else's. When you are having a dialogue with someone and there's a confrontation on ideas and you feel resistance in letting your ideas go, and you sort of know that the other person might also be right, but you really find it difficult to admit it. It's not you, it's just simply that we tend to stick with our own thoughts and insight because it's born in our brain. So that explains the concept of the insight and why, as coaches, we ask questions and we want you to come up with your own answer. There's nothing mystical or spiritual in this. When you hear things like the answer is within yourself, it's actually true. But I understand that this might sound a little bit too fluffy, perhaps. The reality is you have all the resources to get unstuck and to make changes. After all, it's you making the change. We only provide the process, but you as a person are in charge of the real change. You can only do it if you own the process. So triggering insight helps you do this. Now, it's not that easy, though. There are some conditions that we need to ensure are there so that you can generate this insight. And this might be really interesting because it's applicable to any aspect of your life. Let's look a little bit more into how the brain works. There are two different ways in which your brain responds to external stimuli. And this is with a sense of reward, and we tend to move towards something that is rewarding, or with a sense of threat. And of course, we tend to naturally run away from threats. What that means, strictly speaking, is that when you are in a reward state, something happens and you feel great, it means that your brain, in that moment, has produced a certain type of hormones. Now, the brain is made of many different parts. What is important for us now is the limbic system, which is the central part of the brain, and that is the part that handles the emotion and has a gland within that produce certain hormones. Now, hormones are neurotransmitters, and you have to imagine these as little parts that are traveling through the bloodstream. Why this is important? Because if you think about this, the moment that your brain produces dopamine, you don't just feel happy in your brain, you feel happy throughout the whole body. And that's why you have that tendency to act, that motivation to move on. It's because it's traveling throughout the body. So the positive hormones are probably the most familiar. You probably heard of dopamine, serotonin, and oxytocin, which are produced when certain conditions rise, and they make you feel great. And that's sort of known. We know that this happens, and that is great. The cortisol, instead, is the hormone that is produced when a sense of threat is there. Now, the cortisol is also known as the stress hormone, and also is known as the negative hormone. Now, in all honesty, there's nothing negative about the cortisol. It's just known like this in opposition to the positive ones. But the reality is we need to be very grateful to the cortisol being there and for its function, because that's probably the reason why we're still alive and we didn't die as children when we did all sort of crazy things. Cortisol is the hormone that is produced in response to a perceived or a real threat. And that is the trick. The brain is not able, to a certain extent, to understand if a threat is real, then that means that our life is in danger, or if it is a perceived threat. Let me give you an example. Let's say that I'm your boss, and I'm telling you to come into my room, and I say, "Hey, John, come to my room. We need to talk." Something like that doesn't really feel good. Now, what happens is, it is possible that as a response to such a tone, my brain will start producing cortisol. I will feel stressed. I will feel nervous, because I don't know what is happening, but something is telling me there must be a threat here or there. In that moment, it is a perceived threat, because I might be your boss. I may have used that tone, but perhaps it's not you being in trouble. It's not about you. Perhaps it's just about me. I had a terrible time and I need a shoulder to cry upon, or any other thing that might be related to my life, not your life, but still you're producing cortisol. Why? Because your brain can't really decide if you're seriously in danger or not. Learning to define if it is a real danger or not is key in your self-regulation and the management of your emotion, especially in a leadership role, but not only. So understanding this dynamic is key, because sometimes clients come to me and they say, "Oh, I tend to react in this way," or "I am in this way." Well, I think it's really important to understand that some of these reactions doesn't mean that you are in a certain way. It's not you feeling unconfident. It's not you behaving in that way. It's your brain starting certain mechanisms that then manifest in a certain behavior and a certain feeling. So understanding what is your responsibility and what is your brain responsibility helps you handle situation with a certain objectivity. Now, as you notice, the threat arrow is much bigger than the reward arrow. Do you have an idea why? That arrow is bigger because, unfortunately, the effect of cortisol feels stronger and lasts longer in our body compared to the positive hormones. That means that if I give you a compliment and if I tell you, "Hey, John, your presentation was really amazing. I really loved it. Thank you so much," that feels nice, but after 5 minutes, it's probably gone. If I tell you, "Hey, John, come here. We need to talk about your presentation," that sense of trouble will tend to last for way longer. Okay? Again, it's not you lacking confidence. It's just your cortisol works in that way. Now, let's have a look of these in the context of coaching. The positive hormones are empowering chemicals. The difference between dopamine, serotonin, and oxytocin is that dopamine is the hormone of motivation. It is great, but you have to remember that after a high, there's always a low. So dopamine is great, but it's much better if we produce serotonin in the longer term, because the serotonin is not only the happy hormone that makes us feel great, but is also a mood stabilizer. So you have many more chances to perform well in the longer term if you invest in serotonin than in dopamine. And this is the same with your team members or family members or children as well. When we talk about hormones and what happens in your brain, you have to think about this not only just as your brain, but other people's brain as well. And that explains why, for example, certain attitude like micromanaging, it doesn't really work because it puts people under threat. We will see these more in detail later. What you want to do with the people around you is to ensure that when they're around you, they feel good. They produce serotonin. So you want them to produce serotonin when they are around you because they're much more inclined to listen and to like you and to follow you and be inspired by you. If you're not aware of your behavior, you might inadvertently produce cortisol, which makes them run away from you. So I invite you to consider everything that we're learning here in the context of your private and professional life, and try to see through this lens what is happening in your relationship and in the relationship with yourself as well. How do you handle things and how do you treat yourself also makes the difference. Now, this is incredibly important for another reason. And again, let's go back to how coaching works. Something happens when we are in a reward state that cannot happen when we are in a threat state. When we are in a reward state, four functionalities of our brain are highly enhanced, and that is our level of perception, cognitive function, also known as working memory, creative thinking, here insights come back, and a sense of collaboration. These four things are highly enhanced in a brain that is in a reward state, and this cannot happen when we are in a threat state. Again, you see now why a certain attitude that many bosses have can't really work and don't produce results, because they don't understand how the brain works. Because if they knew this, they would change more naturally attitude, more organically attitude to achieve what they want from their team members or children and so on. So these things are only possible in a reward state. What that means from our perspective in coaching is that if I want to trigger insights in your brain and produce that energy, I need to ensure that you will be in a reward state. How do we do this? We will see this later on when we define the steps of the coaching process. But for now, it's important for you to understand that in order to have insight, you must be in a reward state. I wrote an article on this that also gives you step-by-step instructions on how you can put your own brain into a reward state so that you can trigger insights. It's an article that you can find on the IMechE website, and I think you will find it useful. What happens instead when we are in a threat state? Of course, none of these will happen. No perception, low level of cognitive function, creative thinking, and collaboration. We tend to build a wall of defensiveness that makes it impossible for us to develop these characteristics. Most importantly, something else happens. When we are under a threat state, we develop a tunnel vision. What that means technically, when I say that cortisol is probably the reason why you didn't die as children, is because when cortisol kicks in, the internal mechanism tries to save your life by redirecting energies and resources from your brain to your limbs. Why? Because if you are in danger, you need to physically run away. That's how our system works. Sometimes it works incredibly well, sometimes not, because as I say, the brain is not so sensitive to understand if you're facing a real danger or a perceived one. Let me give you an example. Imagine that you are crossing the street. You're crossing the street because your traffic light is telling you that it's green, so that means that you can walk, and the lorry that is coming from the street, his color is red, so you know that he needs to stop and you can go. Okay, this is the ideal scenario. Because we know things don't always go that way. So what happens is, if you think too much, you may be inclined to keep crossing the street even if the lorry is coming at a fast pace, because you think that it's green and for you it's time to go. And he's going to stop because it's red, because that's what the law requires, and so on. By the time that you think of these, you're probably dead. but not necessarily the lorry will stop. The fact that when your life is in danger, the cortisol kicks in and redirects resources like glucose and oxygen from your brain to the limb is exactly what helps you run away. Either stop, freeze in the moment because you feel fear, and that's the effect of cortisol, or run away so that the lorry won't take you. So this is the reason why it is so important to understand what is the impact of cortisol and not consider it an enemy, even if sometimes, okay, it doesn't really help. Imagine a situation in which you are doing public speaking. It's very often it happens, and it happened to me as well, and it's not pleasant. I can tell that you freeze when you're on stage in front of other people, no matter how many times you've rehearsed or how much you own your content. The reason you fear is because somehow you perceive that there is a danger. And in fact, I invite everyone in the audience to never really have a negative expression on the face when you're looking at a speaker, unless you really dislike what the speaker is saying. But if you're thinking about your own stuff, please be careful the expression you have on your face, because that impacts heavily the speaker, because the speaker tends to think, oh gosh, I'm going wrong. In that moment, you tend to have cortisol kicking in because you feel threatened by the reaction of someone in the audience, and that makes you freeze, even if you was very well prepared. So that was a perceived threat. So understanding these dynamics help you understand how your body reacts to things and what you need to do to bring it back. So I hope that helps to put things into perspective. And as I said, if my job is to trigger insight, the first thing that I need to do is to ensure that I put you into a positive reward state, because that's the natural environment where an insight can arise. Now, let's go a little bit more in detail and connect what we just learned with the coaching process. First step, I need to ensure that you stop talking about the problem, which you know very well. What you don't know is the solution. So let's make a shift from problem-focused to solution-focused. That's the first thing. Why? Because when we get out of the problem and we think about the solution, even though, of course, at that stage we don't know exactly what the solution is, but start thinking in terms of what opportunities this solution will bring me, what will happen as a result, what it will give me from an emotional perspective, and so on. By start talking about the solution, we create that natural positive reward state in which it's possible to bring insights. So my job is to exactly do this. Now, one question you may have in mind right now is, okay, Bruna, this is interesting, but can I not do this on my own? I mean, do I really need to invest in coaching to do all that you're saying, make things possible, change behavior, understand others, get unstuck? Can I do it on my own? Yes, you can, definitely. In fact, it's you going to make the change. It won't be me. I bring the process. You bring the context and the resources to make it possible. The only reason why coaching is incredibly helpful here is because it's so tough. Changing the way you think about things, if you don't have external stimuli, it is so difficult, but not impossible. So if you want to invest in a coaching process, that's great. If you don't want or you can't, that is okay. But you need to surround yourself with people that will help you think differently. A wise friend, a wise mentor, or someone who will act as a coach is the best thing you can go for. You want someone that asks you a question more than someone that gives you answer. Now, back to our coaching process. To function at its optimum, the brain must be in a reward state. How do we do this? Well, the brain craves a few things. We analyze here just three for the sake of our understanding of coaching. And these are autonomy, certainty, and connection. What that means is to give the best, to be completely on board and take you to the solution that you want, your brain needs to experience a level of autonomy. How do I handle this as a coach? By asking questions. That's why the reason why we ask questions, we ask permission to share. When we have ideas and we want to share them with you, we always ask permission. And you may say, well, Bruna, I pay you, so of course I want to hear your ideas. We still ask permission. Why? Because we want to feed your brain with what it craves the most. and it creates a sense of autonomy. Once again, this explains why micromanaging doesn't work. It might solve the problem in the moment, but long term, it won't happen. Why? Because it won't enhance your team member's brain. The other thing that the brain really craves, and this is very relatable right now, is certainty. The brain needs certainty to work well, or at least a certain extent of certainty. I don't need to know exactly what I'm going to eat tomorrow, but I need to know that I'm going to eat tomorrow. The fact that I don't know if I will have a job tomorrow and if I will have a salary, that creates huge troubles. And you can certainly see how the lack of certainty that the pandemic has brought impacted many people's brain. When you see some people doing crazy stuff, there's been a huge movement at the beginning of the pandemic where a lot of people went to buy, incredible amount of loo rolls. The reason why they did this is because of their reaction to the lack of uncertainty. It's not explicable rationally. It's just their reaction, their brain's reaction to what was happening. Huge lack of certainty. So as a coach, how do I handle this? I give you a clear process. I always explain as a coach what we're about to do. Again, I don't have the solution and it's not up to me to bring it, but I own the process. I have the tools and the techniques that will help you during the process. And that gives you the brain the level of certainty needed to develop ideas and commitment to take those actions. And this is strictly connected with the third thing that the brain needs, that is a level of connection. By giving you a certain process and by being accountable for you in taking those actions, I'm giving you and your brain that level of connection needed to work at its best. And just so we reconnect with what we said, connection is what helps your brain produce oxytocin. So if you look at the pandemic from this perspective, you will see how much we've been impacted. So if you felt at one point completely lost, it wasn't you. It wasn't your confidence that was diminishing. It's just that your brain at one point suffered for lack of autonomy, certainty, and connection so much. Now, my job is to ensure that you will have them so that you will work at your best. This is also the reason why, no matter how great many self-help books and personal and professional development books and trainings work, the relationship with a coach is always much more powerful because the content is great, but if there isn't that level of certainty and connection that a one-to-one process can bring, you can be easily lost. And that's why these amazing books, I mean, I love them really, they often don't work. And for many people, they become self-help books. To me, they work very well, but I'm a certain kind of person. I understand that for many others, if there isn't certainty and connection, it can't really work. So that's the reason why coaching became so powerful and so many companies are investing in the process. So let's summarize. How does it work specifically? What are the steps of a successful coaching process? We start by clarifying what is the goal. Again, we don't talk much about the problem, just enough to understand the context, but we're not interested in the details. Less than ever, we're interested in what he said, she said, what we need is not to create the context that will lead us to the solution. So the first step in a coaching process is always clarifying what is the goal, what is the solution. Then the second step, of course, is creating in your brain that reward state by focusing on the solution where I can easily trigger insights through my questions and tools and techniques. Once you produce that insight, as we say, that comes with a strong energy. A great coach is the one that leverages that energy by eliciting commitment. So if I ask you a question and you come up with an answer and I notice, because I'm skilled at this, so we notice when you're having an insight compared to just a simple thought, in that moment, a great coach will leverage that energy asking you, okay, amazing, John. So now you've just understood this about you and about your team members and so on. What are you going to do about this? How are you going to translate this inspiration into actions, practical steps? How are you going to do it? When are you going to do it? How will you remember to do it? How will you let me know? And that brings in a level of accountability, which is what makes the coaching process so valuable, because it's simply natural that we all start, for example, the new year full of New Year's resolution. And then after 3 weeks, normally, gym owners, are bringing in a bottle of champagne because they know they made a lot of money and they're not going to have all these members for the whole year. It's simply normal. Accountability is what helps you stick with your ideas and actions and will bring that repetition that is necessary for a change to happen. So these 6 steps are key to make the coaching process effective. What is important here is that you understand, I repeat, it's not that without a coach you can't make it happen. I made a lot of changes on my own before I understood that coaching was happening. It just makes it easier, more reliable, and faster. In all honesty, you can make all the changes that you want as long as you're focused and you follow these instructions on your own. So the process remains the same even if you want to do it on your own. Now, that said, I know you have this question in mind, like, okay, this is all very interesting, but how am I going to measure if I'm actually advancing? Because in this field, it's easy to get lost in inspiration. There's a lot of inspiration on social media and books and so on, and this is amazing, but things only change when we take actions. And we don't want to discover after 3 months of coaching engagement if you're doing well or not. We want to measure this throughout the journey. So how do we do this? Partly, it's based on self-perception, and that is unavoidable. You know when you are getting closer to your goal. Still, we want to use some tools to make it concrete, and especially if there is an investment from your company in this coaching journey, you want to prove them that actually things are moving. How do we do this? For example, through the use of scaling questions. So let's say that you want to improve your impact. So yeah, you want to improve your impact as a leader. My question would be, okay, so between 1 and 10, and 1 is completely lost and 10 is the most impactful leader ever. What do you think you are right now? And you may say, I don't know, I think I am 5. Okay, what would you like to be in 3 months? Well, I think it's reasonable in 3 months to be at 8. Okay, what needs to happen? What needs to happen for you to move between 5 and 8? And then we will define action, strategy, and milestones that we know we need to reach. And that is how you start thinking about the process. So self-assessment is key. But another very powerful tool, which you can find on the IMechE website, is the 360 degrees diagnostic tool. It is a very complete and thorough tool that puts you in the context, especially if you're a leader or if the goal you have in mind somehow is connected with other people. You want to bring them into the engagement as well. We want to know what is their perception of your behavior and your performance, and we want help them help us understand how we're doing with our work. So we're going to ask them through surveys, how do you feel and how they perceive you at one point and throughout the journey. And that is another great way to measure our success. Otherwise, there is another way, and that comes from defining what is your vision, what are your goals, and what are your specific KPIs, and then tracking actions. We can do it manually. There are some apps as well that help us with this. This is how we're going to keep track of what you're doing. And if you maintain your word, if your commitment was, for example, to increase your impact, and it requires to increase the time that you spend with your team members, we may want to measure how often you have your one-to-one with them, or how often you give them feedback so that they know exactly what to do. So it's very much tailored on you, so I can't tell you in advance exactly what we're going to measure because every coaching journey is specifically tailored on the person and the context. But I understand that you may want to understand a little bit more about what it is that we could do together. So we could work on anything that is related on leadership or career. Here is just a non-complete list of things that I normally do with clients, but by all means, imagine this to be way longer. It can be way more because it very much depends on your situation. If you want something to hold on to, these are the most common things I work on with clients in terms of leadership. Making brilliant decisions under pressure, managing your stress, resolve conflicts constructively, and so on. In terms of career, again, this is a non-complete list. These are just the most common things that clients come to us for. And it could be, for example, finding a clear direction. This is one of the most common, actually. Or, yeah, I like my job, but I don't feel very much fulfilled. What can I do to be more fulfilled? Or how can I increase my confidence? This is an incredibly common one. So all these is part of the work with a coach. Now, an important thing that you need to know if you're new to the coaching environment is that it's very much question-led process. It's not only question. Of course, there are research-based tools, techniques, and frameworks, and it is important to know that every coach has different styles. My style is very practical, and sometimes it's directed as well. As I said, my approach is blended between coaching and mentoring. Not everyone works in this way, and you will choose based on what works best for you. Every approach is valid. It's just a matter of chemistry. Now, for example, the way I work, when I say it's very practical, is that I develop some workbooks that I send to my clients so that it helps them to work in between sessions so they won't get lost. It's important to me that they will stay on track. And we maximize our time together with some pre- and post-session questions. Particularly the post-session questions are relevant to help me calibrate my approach to what really works for you. So it's not about, oh, Bruna, thank you, that was amazing. It's more about, I would like to have more of these or less of these. We all, as coaches, have the ability to calibrate our approach. So please help us help you in the best possible way. Every session, no matter what is the approach, will end with some agreed practical assignment, because the real change happens when you put into practice what we agreed through the inspiration and insights that we had during the session. So this will be common. How it changed from one coach to another. As I say, there are many different approaches. The best thing you can do to choose, because you might be confused and I understand this, is to check the chemistry. There's a humanistic approach, there's a science-led approach, which is mostly mine, there's blended mentoring and coaching, there's a purely explorative and more deep kind of work that you can do with some coaches. Best thing you can do, ask for a taster session. And if they don't provide a taster session, maybe ask for a video call so that you can check the chemistry. It is an incredibly deep and intense and intimate work because you're going to really open up yourself. So what is important is that you really feel safe. Every coaching session, no matter what is the approach, it is a psychologically safe and confidential space. And with all the questions that we ask, we're never really looking for the right answer. We're looking for your answer. It's your space, and it's a space in which you can bring everything that is important to you. Some clients, especially high-level senior executives, buy some coaching purely to have a space in which they can speak. And while they speak out loud, instead of just thinking, they often have the solutions on their own. So I had a client who stayed with me for 15 months. And I understand it's an incredibly long time. No worries. Normally it's not that long. But the reason why he made such an investment is because during our weekly session, he needed just a space where he could be himself and just talk. And normally I ask like a couple of 3 questions, no more than this. It was his space to be himself. And by doing this, he was giving space to his inner thoughts, bringing them to life, and then he was taking actions on this. This is just one option. And this is to say that the coaching engagement, again, is very much tailored on you. So you can decide to go for a one-off session, for example, for a specific problem that can be solved in just one clarity session. Or it can be several of individual sessions. You may not want to decide in advance for how long you're going to work with a coach, and that means buying individual sessions, and that's okay. The best solution, even from a financial perspective, is always to invest in packages, because normally they offer a little bit more. for a more affordable price. No matter what is the type of coaching that you're going for, you will always receive a listening and empowering approach from whoever is your coach. So some things are really common. The way we do things can be different based on the approach that we chose. I think I hope I've explained things clearly enough. I'm more than happy to give the next few minutes to answer your questions. So feel free to write in the chat if you haven't done yet, and I would handle it to Rob so he can help us with the question. Do you have any question from me, Rob?
Thank you, Bruna. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Bruna, can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, I can hear you.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Yes.
So there are a couple of questions that came out from the chat box on the session, which was excellent, by the way. First one is, what's the difference between coaching and mentoring? I don't recall clearly that was explained.
Yes, good question. So you can imagine a mentor normally is someone who knows more than you about a specific topic. And actually, I would recommend anyone to look for a mentor in their own profession. So the mentor normally share what they know in order to help you advance more quickly and perhaps saving you from unnecessary mistakes. So mentoring is more about sharing what they know. Coaching is more about eliciting, extracting from you answers. So while mentoring is sharing, coaching is more about helping you grow from within. So from a mentor, you can expect answer. From a coach, you don't expect answer. You can expect frameworks, perspectives, maybe even ideas, but not advice. That is the main difference. And when I say I have a blended approach, it means that in certain topics, I tend to share what I know. For example, if we are about to build your personal brand, there are things that you can't know. I mean, you don't know what you don't know. No matter how many questions I'm going to ask, there are a few things in that aspect. If you're an engineer, you will never really find out. In that sense, I'm going to share my experience on, for example, a pitch that works, or how to present yourself on LinkedIn. In that sense, it is mentoring. Does it answer your question?
I think so. Thank you, Bruna. And the next one I have here is, I can understand positive thinking, but isn't realistic thinking based on reality better? Sometimes people do not want spin or even a solution to a problem, but other needs, etc., to be listened to.
Yes, can you repeat the question? I understand the context. Can you repeat the question, Rob, please?
Yeah, I think basically they were looking to say, rather than positive thinking, as it were, but being realistic thinking is possibly better.
Yes, I don't think it's about positive thinking indeed. It's more about realistic thinking, but it's about expanding the opportunities that you can see in reality. The thing is, our brain works through filters, and these filters is what we call our box. You know, when we think, we have to think outside of the box. That box is what's being built through the years, through our education and family influence and school and books that we read and movies we watched. That built our box. Thinking outside of the box, it doesn't necessarily mean thinking positively. It means expanding that box and the boundaries that keeps us stuck. So I wouldn't see it as positive. I would see as positive the reward state that we need to create in the brain. So that creates the ideal condition for thinking outside of the box to happen. So it is about realistic thinking. It is about seeing these things differently. There's an example that I would like to give very quickly. So we talk in concrete terms. This is really interesting. So there was a problem. A person who just built and sold many buildings and sold all the flats started receiving, talking about many years ago, started receiving lots of emails complaining about the fact that the lifts in these buildings were too low. And they complained a lot, okay? And that is the situation. The builder's owner was stuck because he couldn't spend more money to change the lift. He started calling all his suppliers, and they all say the same thing. It's going to be incredibly expensive, and he's not going to solve the problem. So he was stuck in his thinking because he kept thinking about the problem from the wrong perspective. Now, a solution was found. I'd love to give you the time to think about what was the solution, but actually we don't have it. So I'm going to share it now. The solution here is finding out what is the real problem. The real problem is not the lift being slow. The real problem here, and that is what a coach can help a client to realize, and that is really realistic, what is the real problem here? The real problem is that people keep sending emails and letters to complain. That is the real problem. So it is about shifting from the lift to the people, to the real problem. If the real problem is that people complaining, what we need to solve is finding a way for them to stop complaining. And that is the reason why today you have a mirror inside your lift. The solution to the problem was an outside-of-the-box solution because the question is, what is the real problem? If people are complaining because their perception is that the lift is low, okay, let's give them something that will make them happy throughout the journey so that they will stop thinking about their wasting time and will stop complaining. And that's how the solution, without no money spent, not much money spent, was found. So when I say thinking outside of the box or having insight, I mean this. I hope this helps to see how concrete the process can be. Does it help, Rob?
Thank you, Bruno. Yeah, that was great. If you want to shift on to your next slide, that's probably the questions that we had in the chat box covered.
Okay, so we are about to close. I have 3 questions for you. As I said, I'm a master of asking questions, so I couldn't complete the webinar without these. I'm not expecting you to answer right now in the chat, but I'd love you to take some time to reflect on these. The question is, based on what you've learned today, what is your main takeaway? And how will you turn this into practice? How will you turn this learning into actionable steps into your life or into your work? And what do you think will be different as a result of applying this learning? These are questions for you. I'm happy to leave you with just some thinking. And yes, I hope you enjoyed the session. I hope I explained everything clearly. It's been a great pleasure for me. It's a great pleasure to work with the IMechE and their members. And Rob, I will give it back to you. Unless there is any other question, I'm done. And I'm happy to complete.
Excellent. Thank you, Bruno. That's an excellent webinar presentation. Just before you go, I just want to make you aware of a number of offers that we have at the moment for various training and stuff. So we have Personal Effective Masterclass kicking off in April. And we also have a number of coaching topics and coaching focuses that we can help you with. So by all means, please visit the training calendar at imeche.org/training calendar to get some more information regarding that. And to finish off, just to be aware that actually we can support and help you become a professionally registered engineer. The whole ethos, obviously, of the IMechE is to support and develop engineering excellence. Along that, we can support you becoming a member to become a chartered or registered. So again, please contact BDM at imeche.org or go to imeche.org/workshops to find out any events and information regarding that. And I'd like to take this opportunity again to thank you all very much for attending this afternoon. We're finishing slightly over time by a minute or so, but again, thank you very much and goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.